Hello everyone. Today we have Stefan, and I was waiting for this podcast for a long time, and people who follow us on our LinkedIn know that we agreed to have an episode with Stefan, and today we have you, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for being here because you visited me, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
Now I'm at BVW.
BFVW, exactly.
Mm-hmm. And today I'm going to ask you about digital soil map of Austria. And I will also put the link for what you've been working on the map. And could you tell us how the soil maps are done and how the process goes and why making a soil map is important?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so first, thank you for having me. It was really an interesting exchange, and I congratulate you that on this very interesting podcast you're having. That's a really cool thing. So I'm really honored to be here today. My name is Stefan Forstner. I'm working here at the BFW, the Austrian Research Centre for Forests, where we mainly do forest-related stuff. But we also are doing agricultural soil mapping of Austria. So we are mapping the agricultural areas of Austria. And this thing, as you mentioned, is really interesting, really important, and also difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to really give you a short intro on what we're doing here. So this is an effort to map all the agricultural areas of Austria, so arable soils, but also grassland soils. Mm-hmm. And it has been going on for 70 years now. So it started in 1958.
70 years.
Yeah,
wow.
Almost. And so this is really a long-term endeavor, I have to say. And I'm really honored to be part of this journey.
Mm-hmm. So you said it's been already going for 70 years. And before we started an episode, you all showed me the big documents. And it's not as you imagined. Like I would imagine sitting on your laptop or on your desktop and working with GIS or ArcGIS. Mm-hmm. But could you elaborate how it's really done? Yeah,
so I mean, that's a total natural idea because, we are the millennials generation used to doing everything digital. Mm-hmm. And it is, of course, now digitized, but the original mapping exercise or mapping endeavor is 70 years ago, of course, has been analogous, so to say, so really pen and paper stuff. So what you're talking about and what I've been talking about before is digital soil mapping. So that means you have an kind of information about an area, climate, geology, so maps, right? And then use digital tools to create a soil map. Mm-hmm. But this is not what we're talking about here. Here we're talking about multiple generations of soil mappers going in the field, also having a map of the geology, of the land use, but mapping the soil in the field. So how does it work? So you go out, you have a map of Austria, and then you get your little area, and then you're taking every 100 meters or so. You're taking you're not taking a profile, but you're using the soil drill. Sorry, the soil drill to inspect the soil, right? And then you do this 100 meters, 100 meters, 200 meters.
For how many hectares?
Yeah. So the whole agricultural area of Austria, I think, is 1.5 million hectares, I guess. But you're doing this at the resolution, the original resolution of the product was 1 to 25,000. Yeah? So the maps produced had a resolution of 1 to 25,000.
To make it easier to elaborate, that means how many soil samples or how many soil profiles will be dug. So yeah, let me continue. So you just have a look at the soil with a drill, right? In the field, and you do this every 100 meter, and then
you try to delineate areas where similar soils occur. That is called a soil form in our system, right? So the listeners cannot see it, but I have here a map beside me, and we have areas which are colored with similar colors, right? And each of these areas, each of these polygons is a soil form that we try to map, right?
So just to look for the different colors, which I can see in the map right here, what is the main factors influencing to differentiate these soil types, and how, or is there any history of this much soil forming differences?
Yeah, of course, the guys and also some girls, but mainly guys who did this, they had to know a lot about the geomorphology of the area, about the geology, of course. So you look at your soil, at the drills, more or less, and then you differentiate areas that are similar. So they have similar soil type, but they also have similar site properties. Okay, that means similar parent material, for example. That means similar landform, and also similar, so to say, soil profile appearance, so to say. Yeah. So not only the soil type, but the soil type plus the site properties should be more or less homogeneous, which is a different thing to do.
So also parent material matters here.
Exactly.
And also the slopes and...
Of course. So all the, the geomorphology of the area matters a lot. And that means that as a soil mapper, you have to have a lot of local knowledge, of experience, that you know your area, that you know which kind of soils occur. Because, in the end, this is all... fantasy is a hard word, but this is all, of course, a generalization of the reality, because soils are continuous, of course, right? And we try to differentiate areas that are more or less homogeneous. So it's a lot of experience necessary to do that.
I'm just looking at this map and just think about my country, Kazakhstan. It's 9th biggest country in the world. To make a map to that big country. Yeah. And I've just seen how many documents and how many writing, how many field work it is. That would have been, it already shows that it's a lot of work and effort and field work, right?
Exactly.
70 years continuously going on. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you're right on the point here, because for a relatively small country like Austria, this is, as you see, it's possible, but it still took a long time.
Yeah.
And for even bigger countries, it's nearly impossible to do it, depending on the resolution you want to achieve, of course. We have here a resolution of 1 to 25,000. Maybe you can choose a smaller resolution, then it might be doable, right? But the point is, right now, the soil mapping is moving into really digital soil mapping. So, and what is the difference between the traditional soil mapping and the digital soil mapping? In the traditional soil mapping, you're trying to delineate areas, as I told you, right? Based on field observation. In the digital soil mapping, you try not to do this. What you're doing is you're taking soil samples on a grid, maybe, describing the profile, and then you go and take the data into the computer and say, okay, model, calculate my soil map.
Yeah. But if you would compare, I know I've worked with QGIS on soil maps. I know that there might be overlaps and overestimations. But in your preference, how do you think, can we achieve more with digital soil mapping or with this kind of maps where you really do field works and then you try to put it onto the map, like put the informations about the soils?
Well, I would say, if I could choose, I would of course choose the traditional way of mapping. But I totally see that this is that's not possible. Just because of financial reasons, it's not possible for many, many countries in the world. Think of Africa, for example, right? So this is really a difficult thing. And so today people are trying to do it with digital tools. So they try to extrapolate point information using QGIS, using random forests, you name it, different kind of algorithms. They try to extrapolate the point information into the area, right? So this is how it's done today. But I have to say there's a lot of overlap, because you can use, even in the modern approach, in the digital soil mapping approach, you can use this kind of traditional soil maps as input for the computer. And this is what we are probably trying to do in the next few years here.
Wow. But also the finance for, I know not only for forestry, but for a lot of the biology, I know that there is a huge reduction in the finance. And how do you think, would it be possible? Well, it's already possible because you said that you're already finished with the maps, but for other countries.
Yeah. I think, well, let me say, first of all, soil information is crucial. You need to have it, right? And a lot of countries don't have it, or have at least not the right type of soil information.
Why is it crucial? Sorry to interrupt.
It's absolutely crucial. I just, in advance, in preparation for this meeting, for this conversation we're having right now, I read kind of a paper from Swiss colleagues who made a stock take of soil mapping efforts in Europe. And not all countries have soil maps. And a colleague from Slovakia, Rastislav Skalski, said, if you don't have soil maps, how do you do your soil management? If you don't know nothing about your soil, how do you do your management? How do you give fertilizer recommendations? How do you give irrigation recommendations? Right?
Yeah.
So that's really difficult. So you need to have the soil maps, actually. And it's not so important. I mean, okay, there are differences, but it's better to have a digital soil map, so created with the digital soil mapping techniques, than you have nothing at all, right?
I think in that case, in my country, I've seen, when I had my internship in one of the agricultural companies, there were some companies that would come to your field and make some analysis, what you are basically doing for the map, and then also make with a drone mapping for your field and make all the calculations. But it's very, very expensive. So, but if you had a soil map, I think there would be already different question asked, how we now distribute it to farmers, how we make them to use it, the map.
I mean, you're right. So there's, in principle, I have to say, I think it's a good thing that people are getting interested in their soils and making these kind of analysis, making this kind of maps using the drones and stuff. So it's really good. But I think that's only probably possible for larger farms, right? Because it's so expensive.
Yeah.
So if you want to provide soil information for everyone, then you need to have a state-operated enterprise, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the first point. You have to distribute it, and we are distributing it so in two ways. So you can access it freely via the internet, as I showed you before, right?
Yes.
And if you want to have a specific information, you can also buy it, right? So you can, but you don't need to buy the whole map, but you can buy a certain area. Okay, so second point, I have to say that for management of a specific field, this information we are providing is relatively coarse. So because of the resolution of the map, right? So this is just a good first idea of the soil. And if you want to have specific fertilizer recommendations, then you probably have to take the samples anyway. But at least you have some first information about which type of soil, how deep is it, how stony is it, right? So this is all the kind of stuff you need to know.
Yeah. Also, for the farmers, do you think, I don't know about Austrian farmers that much, are they already provided source of these maps, that they exist and that they can use this source?
Yeah, we're trying to work in this direction, definitely. Okay. Yeah, so we're working with the Austrian Chamber of Farmers and stuff like this. So they are really kind of think tanks, also local Austrian think tanks, extension services and stuff like this. So we're trying to make this information popular. Yeah.
Because in one of my courses, I know that Austrian agriculture is getting reduced and forest land is is increasing, and also at the same time, it kind of My question is, we have climate change, and we know that soils are also changing with climate change. And how useful are these soil maps, which like 70 years is a big number. For 70 years, you've been doing these maps, and now there is a climate change, and the soil change is accelerating. And can you still use the soil maps?
I know, yeah, that's kind of the question of the expiration date of the maps. So two things here, right? So you said that at least in Austria and in many other countries in Europe, forests are increasing in area, right? They're encroaching the less productive lands, so to say, also high up in the Alps.
Yeah.
This is true. So our mapping is not 100% reflecting current reality, at least in terms of land use. So there is, of course, the possibility that some grassland, for example, in the Alps that has been mapped is now partly already forest. But you can see it on the map because we have the possibility to overlay the aerial photo, and then you can see, okay, this should have been a grassland area, but now it's forest already. Yeah, it's difficult because of the long time of the operation and stuff. So the map is not 100% accurate in terms of extent, but I would argue that it is exact in terms of information content about the soil profile itself, about the horizon, vertical properties, at least of these properties that doesn't change so much. Because, as you said, climate is changing, and a big topic is, of course, will soils lose or accrue carbon? And we also have some measurements of carbon, of humus, of soil organic matter, right? So, and this information might not be up to date. That's a fact. But I have to say, the fathers of this mapping exercise, they had in mind to map only the enduring properties of the soil, so texture, for example, because texture will not change so rapidly.
Yeah, exactly. Also, as you said, I agree, it's a good historical data, let's say, of the soil.
Exactly.
Yeah. If, as you said, there is a grassland and there is a forest now, you can already track the changes because you already know what was the soil before. Because that's usually the problem for soil scientists.
Yeah.
We don't have reference historical like soils. Yeah, so that's the reference.
You can, of course, that's a kind of of course, it's only a snapshot for that specific area. So we know this area was mapped in 1970, say. Right? And then we have a snapshot of the soil as it was in 1970, and we can already see, okay, in the past 50 years, forest has encroached. Yeah? Absolutely. So it's not perfect. It's not a dynamic product, but it's rather a static product. And but it is, of course, absolutely essential to have at least this information, because often you don't have this information, right?
Yeah.
You can, sorry.
It's better to have more information than having no information. And you don't know when this information would be essential. There would be times when it always happens when you're working in some project or something, you just delete some useless data and just say,
never delete. There is no useless data, I have to say, so never delete stuff. Yeah.
Especially of the soil. I think it's a great example where you can just look at the map of 1997 or 1998 and then just say, okay, look, soils don't change very fast, but you see that it's changing, and let's look at it up what happened after this year, and you can just track from that year. Yeah,
you can. So at least you have at least 2 points. Yeah, you have the point where the soil has been mapped, and then you have now, right?
Yeah.
So, and the information you can get is the change in the spatial extent of this specific soil form, and probably also, if you do the laboratory analysis, also the change in the soil properties, right? Mm-hmm. So that's better than nothing.
Yes, absolutely. And if I wanted to learn about soil mapping, and I know that you've also attended some of the online course recently, I forgot the name of the platform, but is there any course or platforms you would suggest?
Yeah. So the course I took recently is organized by ISRIC. I've probably heard of it. It's a knowledge center in the Netherlands. And the course I can highly recommend is ISRIC Spring School, where I can learn about digital soil mapping techniques. And so this is a really great course. I can absolutely recommend it, and I've learned a lot myself in this course. But yeah, so this is the one side. So this is digital soil mapping. This is, I have to say, the future of soil mapping. But if you want to learn the traditional way, then you have to go in the field, right? And the best way to learn it is to join an experienced soil mapper and help. Mm-hmm. So try to locate the soil mapping service in your country, in your area, and just ask if you can help with soil mapping.
I will, if you could send me the links, I can also provide them. In the description, you can find the links for the suggested course. So now, the carbon pools in the forest. I know in 2019, some of the papers you've published, that was very interesting for me, because what you've been doing, you've been adding for long-term, I don't know how long-term means in this case, and you've been adding nitrogen fertilizer. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, so we're now switching topics, right? Away from soil mapping and towards the research I did for my PhD. I was very lucky because I had the opportunity to join a project where some colleagues of mine have been adding this nitrogen fertilizer for 20 years. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they started in the 1990s. Oh, 30 years, sorry. 30 years, I don't know. I have to look it up in my paper, right? No, 20 years it was, okay. So it was mid-1990s. And
30 years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was mid-1990s, and we took samples in 2014. Oh. Yeah, so it was, I think, 20 years, 2 decades. I have to look up my papers. There I find it. Yeah, so the basic idea was, you said fertilizer. Yeah, of course, it is nitrogen fertilizer that has been added, is still added, right? So the experiments continue. But the idea was not to fertilize the forest per se, because as you would fertilize a field, an agricultural field, but to simulate the nitrogen deposition. So the deposition of nitrogen that would come from the air, right? Mm-hmm. So via wet or dry deposition.
Why would you would simulate the nitrogen deposition from the air?
Why would you do that? So, because, we humans have overturned, so to say, the natural cycling of nitrogen on this globe. So, we are burning fossil fuels, right? We are keeping animals, and, these are the two main sources of nitrogen. So point is, if we burn fossil fuels, some of these, there's a small amount of nitrogen in these fossil fuels, in oil, in gas. There's some nitrogen. And this has been oxidized, and then it's released into the air and then transported over vast areas. And it comes down with the rain, right? So what we are doing is we are unintentionally fertilizing the planet. Mm-hmm. Just, a farmer would, intentionally fertilize his or her field, but we are doing an unintentionally a fertilization experiment with the whole planet. And it's most, I have to say, this nitrogen deposition is, so to say, an environmental problem in large areas of the world where we have concentrations of people living there. So, for example, it's the Eastern US, it's Western Europe, and also China, right? So Eastern Asia. There we have lots of power plants, we have lots of traffic, we have lots of farms.
Yeah, especially close to the big cities.
Exactly. And these are producing nitrogen. So we would say, okay, nitrogen, 70% of the air is nitrogen. Yeah, but reactive nitrogen. So this is not the N2 we have in the air, but it's like ammonia nitrate and stuff. That's then deposited over large areas. And now, to come to your question, two colleagues of mine, Patrick Schleppi in Switzerland and Per Gundersen in Denmark, were interested in the effects of this nitrogen deposition on forests, on forest growth, on forest health.
What would have been some of the results you've obtained from that research so far? Yeah,
so far. I would just condense it in a short way. It really depends on the soil type. So the effect of nitrogen is really dependent on the site and on the soil type, because we looked at two sites with very different soils. So one has a pot soil, very acidic soil in Denmark, and we also had a glaze soil in Switzerland, which is waterlogged a little bit. We have reducing conditions there. But also it's a very nutrient-rich soil. So in the glaze soil, we found that the pH is reduced. We found that the calcium is lost from the soil, from the exchangeable calcium is lost. So we are getting conditions that are not so conducive for, would say, plant growth.
So it's because of the nitrogen fertilizer decomposition.
Exactly. Because once you add nitrogen to the soil, a lot of things happen. Nitrogen is really, really a complicated element, also a very useful, a very interesting element, but also an element that has a lot of fates once it's been added to the soil, right? So it can be taken up by plants, of course. It can be taken up by microbes. It can leach directly through the groundwater. Yeah. It can exchange the calcium from the exchange sites away, right? So you lose the calcium, but the ammonium sticks on the exchange in the soil. So a lot of things can happen. And what exactly will happen, that depends on on the soil type, for example, and on which kind of site properties you have.
I think it's also worthwhile mentioning forests usually don't have a lot of nitrogen, and for the nitrogen, it's negligible amount of nitrogen, and forests are okay living with a less amount of nitrogen because of the industry, because of the humans, like transport activities, some activities, we've increased the nitrogen in the air, and that nitrogen, it's not N2, which we have naturally in the air. It's other compounds, reactive compounds. So they are being decomposed. And as you said, so they are having a negative impact at some points, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Nitrogen can have a lot of different impacts depending on site, not only negative, because at many sites, for example, forest growth, so biomass production, tree growth is increased. And we also found that at the nutrient-rich site. So at Switzerland, I told you, we have these clay soils, which are just water-influenced soils, but also from the parent material, very nutrient-rich. And at this site, we found that the trees made more leaves. Yeah, they increased in diameter and stuff like this. So it was actually beneficial for tree production on this, for forest production at this site. But at the other site, it was detrimental for the trees because they were growing on a very nutrient-poor soil there, and they cannot make use of the additional nitrogen because they do not only need nitrogen, they also need other compounds, right? So phosphorus, for example.
Yeah. So in that case, I think we can switch to phosphorus now. Yeah, because in 2019's paper, you said that nitrogen, in that paper, there was effect on limitation of phosphorus, right?
Yeah. And this effect was more pronounced at the nutrient poor site. Okay. So I have to say that this phosphorus limitation, we inferred it from measurements of enzyme activities. You know that?
Yeah.
You have done it yourself, right?
I yes, that's how we are having this podcast, actually. I've stolen some of your equipments from the lab and I posted it on my LinkedIn, and Stefan, he commented that it's his.
Well, not stolen. I just put, it's still a name tag on the pipette tip case. It's still my name on it.
That wasn't stolen. That was given for us.
Exactly.
By the course supervisors.
Yeah, that's totally fine. So I'm not offended in any way. No, that's fine. So and you also learned to do this enzyme analysis, right? So we did that also in this project, and we saw that the enzyme activities you measure were increased at the site and in the plot where we added nitrogen. And that makes you think, because you add nitrogen and then you measure that the soil enzymes, which are produced by the soil microbes and also the roots, to acquire phosphorus from organic material, from litter, from soil organic matter, right? They were increased. So you give them nitrogen, but apparently they use this nitrogen to produce enzymes to get more phosphorus. And this is why we deduced, or why we assumed, that they were more phosphorus limited. I mean, the story is very simple. You give them, maybe they were not nitrogen limited. You give them nitrogen. Now they're no longer nitrogen limited.
It kind of reminds me the agricultural land where we must put main fertilizers all the time to have the certain yield. And agricultural lands get used to it. I mean, they didn't get used to it, but if you don't give the required nutrients, you don't have the, let's say, plant yield. So that's what's happening. It also seems to me that the more they have the nitrogen, the more active they are, and they try to use up all the nutrients at the same time, but they don't think about think about serving nutrients as would forests do usually.
Yeah. Difficult question, if I understood you correctly. So the microbes, they were just, they were not more microbes there, right? They use the nitrogen. Maybe they use it less efficiently. We don't know. But they also, of course, were in need of phosphorus. And they tried to get the phosphorus from somewhere. And you have to know that in this potsols, this potsol developed on a sand, more or less. So this is like, a glacial plain. When the glaciers retreated, they left some sandy plains behind. And on these sandy plains, these potsolic potsols developed in Denmark, in northwestern Denmark. And these sands are very nutrient poor. So usually phosphorus comes from the rock, right? From the weathering of the rocks. And in this case, there is not much to weather there. So all the phosphorus, or I suppose most of the phosphorus, has to come from the internal recycling of the forest, litter of the soil organic matter. And to recycle the phosphorus from litter and organic matter, you need these enzymes who break down the organic matter and release the phosphorus, right? So this is the interpretation of the enzyme data, more or less.
Okay.
Yeah, so we really have to say, real limitation has to be tested in the lab. You have to take the soil, you have to add carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus, alone and in combination, and then measure the growth of the microbes. So we inferred the limitation from the enzyme data, but I think it's valid to do this.
Yeah. But so we mentioned some of the advantages, that it increased the tree biomass, and also some of the disadvantages for the poor soils. Specifically, there would be phosphorus limitations, right?
Exactly. That's one danger of this nitrogen deposition on poor soils, and that's why it is so important to consider the site properties, because it has been suggested, as a mitigation effort to climate change, it has been suggested to just fertilize forests, to do large scale fertilization of forest with, for example, nitrogen, to boost forest growth, that more carbon dioxide can be incorporated in the forest biomass and stays there for a long time, right? But we say you have to be very careful and think about it. And because the effects of this fertilization are dependent on the soil and site conditions. So at some sites that might be beneficial for forest growth, on other poor soils, it might be detrimental, because the trees at this pot soil site, they started to die because they could not, and still probably cannot cope with this additional amount of nitrogen.
Yeah, also for those who are not following up why phosphorus limitation is so detrimental, we need phosphorus. Every living organism needs phosphorus. Your DNA, RNA, we need phosphorus for your DNA. So it means that it's very crucial element. And I've already told you that we will talk about there was a paper I've read during my course on soil biogeochemistry and agro-ecosystem systems. Soil biogeochemistry in agro-ecosystem. It was in Göttingen. And then that paper was, I've also sent you, very interesting for me, that they made a prediction that in 2040 or around 2040, there would be a peak of phosphorus curve, they called it. That means after that year, there would be a huge limitation in phosphorus.
Yeah, so maybe a huge, I have to say, a huge demand in phosphorus that cannot be met by mining, right? Because we need phosphorus fertilizer is mined, right? And from phosphorus-rich minerals. And these mineral deposits, they are not distributed equally. That's the first problem. So equally around the world. And second, they are limited. That means, and also the paper you're mentioning, I think I have to say I have to read it. I haven't read it yet. But what I know about this topic is that we know that the phosphorus resources, the phosphorus ores, so to say, so they are limited on this planet. But we need it, right? We need it for fertilization. So, and the demand is rising, and the production of phosphorus from minerals, we can foresee that it's limited, similar to peak oil, for example. We also know that the oil reserves are somehow limited, right? And that is why people are thinking about ways to produce fertilizers not from minerals, but also from wastewater treatment, sludge, for example, wastewater sludges, from kind of waste streams, to more or less produce a more closed phosphorus cycle, right?
Yeah, I know in Australia they've invented a toilet. So
yeah. Urine is very phosphorus rich. So it has been used as natural fertilizer for ages. Yeah, maybe we should return to that. It's a good idea. Yeah,
I would love to have a toilet where I can put some effort on keeping the for those people who really think like it's a joke. It's funny, but the phosphorus is really an important element. It's an essential element, and we could live without oil, perhaps. There are some alternative energy source, but without phosphorus, and also phosphorus cycle takes thousands of years, right? Millions or thousands, not millions, thousands of years. And we have very limited source of phosphorus. That's why it's so interesting that in 2040, there would be limitations of phosphorus. And after that paper, I've read like several months later about 2040 prediction from MIT that in 2040 there would be collapse of all the civilization and humanity.
Oh.
And I was like, wow.
That's a coincidence, huh? No, but that's a really dire prediction, I have to say. So that's a really pessimistic prediction. I'm not sharing this because, that's way within our lifetime. So we don't want to have collapse of civilizations within our lifetimes. But yeah, I mean, it is a point worth reflecting on. So it is probably also, our listeners are now interested in doing some research in this field because it's very important.
Yep. Phosphorus definitely has a huge future and it's required. And also we are fighting for it. Like we are fighting for our future. You are doing your research on forestry, like mapping the soils, and I'm doing in agriculture. So we are trying to fight for it. But it still bothers me that, but what do you think about our future, like humanity's future?
Yeah, that's a big question. Please specify.
All right. So let's say, just looking at our development right now, that we are still dependent on the oil production, and what's happening with the politics, especially with Russia and Ukraine. I always point it out because it's happening in 21st century when people realized we are rational, but you see what's happening. And also too pessimistic, but how they became addicted on social media. And also we see, it's from my perspectives in my country, I see not people are interested in agriculture sciences or they are not willing to work in that area. I don't know if it's happening also in Austria. What else? I think an energy source, especially how we are dependent still on. I know there are still a lot of works done on electrical, on alternative energy source. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really broad topic, right? So we're touching now politics, we're touching societal developments, the social media. Okay, that's huge. And I have to say in general, right? So I was really, coming back to your first topic, I was really shocked when the news in Ukraine broke. I was really shocked. I was really, I think, at least 1 week really, not depressed, but really moved. Because I didn't think at that point that this was still possible in Europe. Because we are from a generation where we are lucky enough not to have experienced war firsthand, right? So this was really, I don't know, there was really a thing that I couldn't understand. And I'm still having a hard time trying to understand what's going on. But the point is, what can you do, right? So you can speak out, you can support people, right? You can make your voice heard. And you can find people who are thinking positively about the world and connect to them, right? And try to make a difference in your own field. It doesn't mean that you have to, silence yourself or do not allow yourself to have a political opinion. You should have, right? But what I would like to point out is that you have to try to be a positive force in the world, right? You cannot single-handedly solve all the issues you're touched upon. You cannot solve the social media crisis. You cannot solve the war, right? But you can be a positive force in the world. You can try to work on yourself. You can try to, and that's probably the most important thing, is try to find people who are supportive, who are willing to change something to the good, and then try to make a contribution together with them. And I mean, just maybe I'll shall give you an example, because we were talking about toilets, right? So this is just a thing you can do. Maybe if you're in the situation, you can try to switch to a dry toilet. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, we did that. So my girlfriend now, she's really into the topic right now because she's also looking for ways to do something meaningful. Mm-hmm. And now we are making compost, right? We are having a dry toilet in our garden and stuff like this. We are in the privileged position to have a little garden, so we can raise our own vegetables and stuff like this. So you can do it via your professional life, mm-hmm. by choosing a career, for example, in agriculture, as you are about to do, I guess. Mm-hmm. And you can also try to change something in your personal life, to change your lifestyle to a lifestyle that you think is more sustainable and more conducive of the peaceful and long-term development of humanity. So that's what I would recommend. Because if you're just, doom scrolling all the time on your Insta or whatever, that will not change anything.
Yeah. I think one of the best answers I heard, because you narrowed down from a general question where we have no future, and you narrow it down and you said start acting by start from changing your actions.
Exactly. I mean, your actions alone, make no mistake, your actions alone will not change anything. In a physical sense, mm-hmm. you will not solve climate change single-handedly by not using a car, for example. That's mm-hmm. an illusion, I have to say, right? But what's even more important is that you are a role model. You do things differently, and you are being seen by others, and that will inspire others also to change their behavior. So it's more important about what you're kind of representing in the world, and you should probably, that's at least my point, you should be aiming to represent a kind of force of the good. And that's what we could probably agree upon. If you don't have a garden, I mean, that's not everyone has a garden. Even if you don't, yeah, just think about your consumerism. It's probably not the best idea to buy stuff just for having stuff. So we are trying to reducing. I don't own a car. I had one, but I sold it. Yeah, mm-hmm. You don't need it. Focus on the things that are really, really important to you, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a deep one. Where you can go discussing forever,
absolutely. Yeah. Because
but I love it.
the topics so broad, and I just want maybe add a final comment on that. So you said young people from your country, they're just not interested in agriculture, hanging around on social media all the time, kind of mm-hmm. delusioned. That's kind of a notion that has been made about the youth forever and ever and ever and ever. And then we are back at Plato saying, oh, the youth, it's useless. Mm-hmm. Forget about it. Yeah. I mean, of course, you always have people that are kind of interested in things that you might not find so interesting or so valuable, whatever. But, this general notion that nothing is becoming better is just nonsense, right? So just focus on the people that are doing interesting stuff, try to connect to them, and then you probably can make a contribution.
Mm-hmm. Maybe just last point I would mention, I've recently, 2 days ago, I've read the Sunscream song lyrics, and it totally changed my life. And in that lyrics, I will then show you, they say, and eventually you will get older and you will start to complain that in your time everything was better and the youth respected their elders, yeah. and etc. Yes, I feel like I'm getting older. Okay, let's switch the topic now. So switching the topics, what do we know so far from simulated soil drying and rewetting lab experiments or experiments in general about the soil microorganisms?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is a research that I did for my master's. I did so it's like a little bit back now, a little time ago. So I'm not an expert in this field, but I did some little lab experiment. And let me just start by saying that the interest in this topic, of course, is motivated by climate change. So, apart from a general rise in average temperature, climate scientists also predict that the hydrological cycle will intensify. What does it mean? It means that the rain and the snow are not going to come, more or less evenly, so to say, quotation marks evenly, right? But are going to come more extreme, events. So we have longer droughts and we have more heavy rainfalls in between. So this is kind of one of the prediction that is made by the IPCC, for example. And this was the motivation to ask ourselves, okay, what will happen to the soil microbiome or to carbon nitrogen in the soil? So also, it was not my own idea, but colleagues from mine, they had set up an experiment at the eastern border of Vienna, having 3 types of agricultural soils filled in lysimeters, where they simulated this kind of altered rainfall patterns. And for my master's thesis, I took some of this soil in the lab and analyzed kind of enzymes and greenhouse gas again. So the methods are quite the same. So enzymes, greenhouse gas fluxes, and also microbial biomass and stuff like this. So kind of basic research. But what we generally see is that the soil microbes, they of course don't like the dryness, right? So if it's really dry, part of them dies, and they just, they die, they explode, so to say, they die, and then the nutrients kind of get released, the nutrients that are stored in the microbial biomass. But part of the microbes, they just survive this drying and rewetting cycle, and when the soil then gets rewetted again, they can really have a good time. They can really thrive. Because now the water is again there. There's less competition from the microbes that died. And also, there's a lot of, microbial corpses lying around, waiting to be eaten by the surviving microbes. So, what we have first is during the dry phase, we have kind of a die-off of soil microbes, although the greenhouse gas fluxes are kind of reduced because there's less soil respiration, right? We have the physiological activity of the microbes is down-regulated just because it's too dry, because everyone needs water, right, to live, to breathe, to metabolize. And after that, when the soil is rewetted again, then you have a flush of activity. So the microbes, they really thrive in this period. And, the bottom line is you can actually lose by this, flush, you can actually lose carbon and nitrogen from the soil. Even more, so even if you take, if you sum up the whole fluxes during the dry and the wetting phase, you lose less carbon nitrogen during the dry phase, but you lose more through the wetting phase. And then even, if you sum it up, it can be a net loss of carbon nitrogen from the soil.
Just from the wetting.
Exactly, because the wetting is so intense. It reconnects the pore space. Microbes and their food can now meet in the pore space. They can metabolize the carbon compounds, the dead corpses of the microbes that unfortunately didn't survive the dry spell. And a second point is that this rewetting flush also really, really impacts the soil structure. So you have the aggregates, So soil is, in most soils, organized as kind of crumbles, clumps, right? So we say aggregates. And these aggregates, they break up upon rewetting, right? So in these soil crumbs, there is a lot of carbon, nitrogen hidden away from the microbes. And if you rewet the soil, then they break up, check, and now you have the microbes that can access all the substrates and metabolize it and respire and produce N2O, and so on.
So for the soil aggregates, I know that there would be erosion, a lot of erosion due to the intense rainfall.
Exactly.
And also for the breaking down the aggregates. And so it also has an influence on aggregates.
Absolutely. So this is the physical influence, right? So you have this intense rainfall that can wash away the soil, right? If you have an intense rainfall, then you lose the soil just by, the physical force of the rain. And also you break some of the aggregates. And of course, then the soil gets washed away. But also this breaking up of aggregates allows the microbes now to access the carbon nitrogen compounds, so organic matter that was hidden away from them during the dry phase, right? So the key point here is we have a lot of dynamics, right? Microbial dynamics. And these dynamics might be intensified through these intensified rainfall patterns. And in the end, it could mean that some soils actually losing carbon nitrogen.
And also a lot of carbon nitrogen would be emitted in the forms of CO2.
Absolutely.
And N2O,
Absolutely.
which increase more climate change.
Yeah. So yeah, that would be
Accelerates.
Yeah, that would be exactly. So we call it the positive feedback, right? Positive feedback loop, because climate change alters rainfall patterns, and the rainfall patterns release. So the more intense rainfall patterns release more carbon nitrogen from the soil. And also at the same time, we are losing soil quality, we are losing soil structure. So the soil really suffers. So one could argue, what do you recommend? What can farmers do now? Because, the farmers cannot change the weather.
Yeah.
But
except I've heard in China, they've been, I don't know if it's true. I've heard it like in 2 news channels.
Okay.
I don't know if it's true that they've been changing the weather.
Really?
I don't know how they do it. I will check it out if it's true or not. But I've heard that it was a newsletters which I usually follow. And they said like somehow China is trying to change the weather.
Okay.
Yeah. But skipping from that, coming to realistic, I'm always up for like fantasy, sci-fi ideas. But coming back to a realistic view.
Yeah, no, that's, I haven't heard about that. That sounds really spooky, I have to say. But yeah, just commenting on that. There's actually also in Austria, there are areas where hail is a real problem. And there are some, farmer communities that hire airplanes to, control the hailing and stuff like this. So that's okay, but that's a different story. What I wanted to say is that what can you do if you are a farmer, right? And if you don't want this to happen, if you don't want to lose the soil to this intense rainfall event, what are you going to do? It's easy, right? You have to keep your soil covered. So you use cover crops, right? So you try to reduce the bare time of the soil as much as possible.
Cover crops.
Yeah.
But one problem in some of the regions where it's extremely hot, I heard that cover crop also is a good source for fire.
Okay. That might as well be true, yeah. I haven't heard that. So this shouldn't be a problem in Austria, where it's mostly humid, so we have enough rainfall. But what I've heard is that cover crops, or what I know is that cover crops can use a lot of water that used to be or is needed by the main crop, right? But if you can manage it properly, and this is a tricky thing, then it should in the end be beneficial also for the main crop, also in terms of water, and also in terms, of course, of soil structure and nutrients.
Just to summarize what we've talked so far about forest and soil in general, I just want to know how much we know about soil microorganisms. Doesn't matter about forest or agriculture. How much we know, how much we don't know.
It depends on who is we in this question. So no, we certainly know some things, a lot of things about soil microbes. And this knowledge, so to say, has increased drastically in the last 20 years, I would say, because of the advent of the molecular techniques, right? So the main problem in soil microbiology, or in environmental microbiology for that matter, is that many of these microbes, they do not like to grow in the lab because they're really adapted. They have evolved, so to say, in environments that are not easily reproduced in the lab. Because in the lab, we used to, try to culture, to create poor cultures of certain microbes. And we use different media, so liquid or media where we add nutrients, where we add energy sources, and we try to cultivate these microbes in the lab. But this is not really easy for most of the microbes that live in soil. People say, so there have been kind of estimations, but this is known as the Great Plate Count I don't forget about it. So
I cannot also pronounce some of the. What I can do, I can put that word in the description.
Please. So it's anomaly in German, though, but you know what I mean. So the point is, when we try to cultivate microbes on plates, right? We can count a lot of colonies on these plates, but we know from microscope pictures that there are a lot more microbes in the soil than we can count on our plates. And this is because the microbes, for some reason, do not like to grow in the lab. Now, so fast forward, this was like the situation in the mid 90s, I would say. Fast forward to now, we now have the huge opportunities of getting genetic information from the soil. So we can extract DNA, we can extract RNA, we can extract proteins. So biomarkers, so to say, very specific biomarkers in the case of DNA, right? The whole genetic information of a gram of soil can be extracted, can be analyzed, can be sequenced, and we have now a much better picture of what is there in the soil. But this is still an incomplete picture. This is very much incomplete because to know which kind of microorganisms are living in the soil, you have, of course, to extract the DNA, and then you have to do a lot of bioinformatics. And so you take DNA, you compare it with a database of known DNA samples, but you also already have to know which kind of organism this reference sample belongs to. So it's kind of, a big problem.
So let's say we have a tool which we can now use better to observe the soil microorganism, and we are learning, or we are trying to use this tool better and trying to use this tool in every soil which we could, right? Try to speak like...
Yeah, that's true. So we have really, really incredible tools, but these tools, they do not, they do not think for us. They do not relieve us from thinking about what we want to know. And in the end, they also, if we really want to, to do microbiology, we really will have to go back, take the soil sample, try to cultivate the organisms, and maybe be a little bit more creative about how to cultivate these organisms, right? Because it's not so easy. It's really, really hard. And there are a lot of tremendous soil microbiologists outside. So I would prefer myself, to see myself as an ecosystem ecologist. So I'm really, really only, maybe 10% of me is a soil microbiologist, because this is really hard work, right? No, to cultivate these organisms in the lab is really, really, really difficult. In Vienna, for example, there we have a great group, a lot of great groups, but some of them are working together at the University of Vienna, and they managed, for example, to cultivate to obtain poor cultures of ammonium oxidizing archaea, right? Which hasn't been possible for a long time. So this is really, and I know that it took them ages. So it took them really, really several years to cultivate this kind of organism, to show that it is really widespread in soil, that is possibly important for the ecology. But they really, really had to invest a lot of time, a lot of creativity, a lot of laboratory skills to get the pure culture of this organism, which is really hard.
Exactly. One of my lecturers said me from Göttingen, I cannot remember her name, but she told that we know so much. What we know about soil science, like soil microorganisms, is just the beginning of the soil microorganisms.
Yeah,
actually.
exactly. So there are, there's a nice quote, also from one of my lecturers. It's Gerd Bachmann from Uni Wien, where I saw this quote first, and it's like a picture. Two guys, one digging a hole in the soil, and there's the writing is, there's treasure everywhere, right? So in the soil, treasures everywhere, and that's especially true for soil microbiology.
Yeah. Just imagining how much we less know about it. And just to generalize this whole amazing episode which you had today, I'm going to ask you some general questions. You can answer as you want. If you want to go personal, you can go personal or professional. So the first question is my favorite. Are you scared of climate change or possible horrible future scenarios?
Sometimes, but I choose not to be scared.
What makes you, what kind of scenarios makes you scared, and what motivates you to not be scared?
As I said, when I was younger, I'm in my mid-30s now. When I was younger, I tended to be kind of sometimes not really, or sometimes hopeless, right? But the point is, I can totally relate to that feeling, right? I can totally relate to it, and I have sympathy for people feeling hopeless, because there's, a lot of things going wrong in the world. But in the end, that won't change anything. That won't change your personal well-being. It won't change the world. It won't change our attitude towards nature, our social relationships, or whatever. So I think there's no point in being overly pessimistic. There's just no point. I can totally relate to the feeling, but then, do something else. Grab a guitar, play a song, whatever, go out, look at some trees. That's really nice. So, I mean, of course, I'm kind of, sometimes I'm really, I'm overwhelmed. Everyone is overwhelmed once in a while. But that's just natural. But then, put your phone away.
That's the best advice.
Put your phone away, go running or do some Tai Chi, right?
Tai Chi?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What is it?
Yoga?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you've heard about Tai Chi. It's kind of an ancient Chinese school of movement. So it's like, we call it in Kampfkunst. So it's, fighting. It's a way of moving. Mm-hmm. It's a way of moving. It's a way of, physical training, but also it's a kind of, we could say it's a meditation in movement. Mm-hmm. So it's coming from ancient Chinese tradition. And
how long you've been doing it?
Good question. I started, taking a course when I was in my mid-20s. At university, there was a course that says, try Tai Chi, it's nice. But I just then, forgot about it, was too lazy. And then after 2 years, I think 2 years ago, I resumed training. And it's really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. Also, it's meditation and movement. So after a long day at work, you have a lot of thoughts. Then you do your form, because it's a form of movement. Mm-hmm. And you forget about it. You just concentrate on yourself, on your body, on your movement of your body in the space. And everything's fine then, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. it's better than just sitting there and meditating and doing some movement, which is very good for your body.
Yeah, it is. I would not say better. So it depends on which kind of type you are, right? So if you like to move, that's fine. If you like to sit and meditate, that's also fine, right? So it's just, it depends.
Yeah, I would love to move and do some kind of fancy, because I always watch some fighting or Chinese movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's not kung fu. It's a smaller brother of kung fu. You can also do it if you're 80 and in the park you're an old guy and you're just. But Tai Chi you can do all the time. That's fine. Yeah.
So, and what is your favorite thing about science you love the most?
Difficult question. It's that you you can follow. I mean, if you have if you have chosen science to be a job, you're in a very privileged position, because you're paid for doing what you love. You're paid for investigating how nature works, right? And that's really fascinating. That doesn't mean it isn't hard, because it is hard. To do good science, it's really hard, and you have to be really dedicated and learn a lot and push yourself. But remember always you're very privileged, because you can do what you're good at, what you love, what is super interesting, because nature is the most interesting thing I can imagine. And if you're very lucky, you can also do something good for society. So that's what I love most about science. Yeah.
Win-win.
Yeah. Win-win. Yeah.
Infinite wins.
Well, to be honest, on this way to infinite wins, you have also to accept some kind of very hard losses.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a tough way to go, actually. Yeah. I'm still considering, thinking a lot. I definitely love science. I love everything about it. I want to know. I want to investigate. That's also what I'm doing it, starting to talking with people in science and get to know them, know what they're doing. And that's how I also get to know more, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm also sharing with people and with what I've learned, from today, from our conversation. I've learned a lot. Tai Chi? Yes.
Tai Chi?
Tai Chi. Okay.
Tai Chi
I'm definitely trying.
Yeah, you should. It's cool.
So just what's the meaning of life? What for you, and what keeps you every time to wake up? What motivates you?
Well, the meaning of life, I'm not trying to give an answer to that. That have to be, everybody has to figure it out for him or herself, I have to say. What keeps me motivated? That depends on the day, on some days I'm just, I'm kind of a routine guy. I love to have my routines, my daily routines. That, gives me structure over the day. But some days, are special because I have a special appointment. Some days, I'm having an interview. That's not happening every day. So every day you can find, if you want, you can find something special to look forward to. And that's what I'm trying to do, right? Some days I'm looking forward to getting home, and I know that my girlfriend has made some very nice vegan pizza, for example. So you can find in every detail of life, you can find something to look forward to.
And last question, where and how our listeners can find you online?
Yeah, so if you want to find me online, visit LinkedIn. Look me up at LinkedIn. So it's Stefan J. Forstner at LinkedIn. It's a ResearchGate, Google Scholar. You can also try to, find me at my workplace. So I'm working at the Austrian Research Centre for Forests, or BFW for short. Just Google it, you'll find me. You can try to have a look at the digital soil map we have been talking about.
Yeah, I will provide the link for the digital soil map first, and second for LinkedIn social media, and also the Google Scholar. And I would just to summarize, thank you so much for this great opening up about what you've been doing in the past, about your masters, and what you trying to share the knowledge you acquired so long, and you've been already showing me some of your works, like you've been working. That's been great. And now I know that what I'm doing right now is meaningful. Like I could really get to know amazing people like you. And I'm thrilled, to be honest. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for to your listeners. I think you're doing a great job on this podcast. It's really, really great stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.